This has been a successful image for me. It has been used for marketing a finance company, decor images in homes, and features in the Novotel hotel rooms at Christchurch Airport. The video is broken down into 3 parts. Number 1, I'll describe how I came to capture the image and the gear used. Number 2, how I choose to process the image. And number 3, why I think the image has been successful. And lastly, a bonus tip. I'll show a technique that lets you shoot directly into the sun without getting lens flare. The image was taken on an overnight trip with my younger brother to Bealey Spur hut in the Arthur's Pass region. I knew that a short, sharp storm was on the way, so we were in a hurry to get to the hut. It was also around midday in summer, so I wasn't expecting to stop for photos, as the midday light's usually too boring. But the light changed quickly as the dark clouds rolled in while we were on a ridge with a great panoramic view. I also knew that I could stop, set up my tripod and camera, get the shot and be on my way within 5 minutes. I had done it many times before and I had been thinking about the composition as we were hurrying up the ridge. So here are all of the images I took in that brief stop. I can see that I've taken all of these individual captures in order to overcome 2 challenges with the scene. Number 1, exposure. Because I'm shooting into the sun, it is quite likely that I won't be able to capture the full range of brightness with just 1 exposure. Number 2, panoramic format. The composition I wanted suited a panorama, wider than the widest lens I had with me at the time, which was 24mm. So I needed to take multiple views with enough overlap to stitch them together later in software. Photographing with a view to what I can achieve in post-processing has become such a habit now, it happens automatically when I'm out in the field. That's why I believe it's a huge advantage to have good post-processing skills. It really changes the way you take photographs and gives you more potential with your images. The images were shot on a Canon EOS 5D Mark II with a 24 to 105mm Canon zoom lens. If we look at the metadata for these images, I can see that I've tried zoom settings of 24, 35 and 45mm. Different focal lengths won't stitch together, so I need to select one of these zoom settings for stitching. I'm going to go for the middle one, the 35mm, as this gives me just enough foreground and cloudscape for my intended composition. Next, I can see that I've taken exposures at 1/80th and 1/320th of a second. I'm going to see if I can get away with using the lighter of these exposures and still retain detail in the bright areas. I go to the Develop module and turn on the Highlight Overexposure warning for the image that has the brightest cloud area. The red overlay shows me the area that is completely burnt out, and by sliding the exposure slider I can see that I can recover all of the detail I need, and also have plenty of detail in the shadow area. I nearly always shoot in RAW format, which gives me a lot of leeway in post-processing, so I don't actually need to combine exposures in this case. Straight on to stitching. I make sure all of the 3 images are selected, right-click and select Photo Merge, Panorama. So here's a preview of the merged image. To get rid of the distorted edges, I can choose Crop, Fill or Boundary Warp. I don't want to crop because I want to retain all of the image. Fill edges in this case is a little obvious due to the repetitive cloning patterns, so I'm going to choose Boundary Warp. This warps the edges of the image without noticeable distortion or loss of quality. So now we have the stitched image, I can start with some global tonal adjustments. I'm going to ignore the over bright sky as I'll use local corrections for that. I tweak the exposure, contrast and black sliders to give me the overall tonal range I want. I can always come back to global adjustments after adjusting the sky. To adjust the sky brightness, I go to Masking Sky. This automatically selects the sky area and a red overlay appears showing where the mask is active. I'm going to use the highlight and exposure sliders to bring some detail back into the clouds. I will also use the shadow slider to make the dark clouds even darker. A couple of subtle finishing touches would be to give the sky a slight blue tint and increase the clarity to make the clouds pop out a bit. Now a good technique is to go too far with the adjustment and then pull it back to where it's more realistic and believable. And that's about it for processing. Believe it or not, I'm a big fan of getting it right in camera as much as possible, and only doing in post-processing what can't be done in camera. It means less work in front of the computer, which means more time for the fun bit, getting out in the landscape. And for some reason, getting it right in camera seems to lead to richer, more believable images. I've said in a previous video, all great images have composition, light, and gesture. This image has a nice composition and interesting lighting, though the gesture or decisive moment isn't so obvious. But I think the moment captured is the moment before the storm hits the photographer. And indeed, we only had just made it to the hut before the skies opened. Also, a few minutes after I took the shot, it got much darker and the light was much flatter and less interesting. So here's the bonus tip. This works best on a tripod as it means less work in Photoshop trying to line the images up later. So take your shot into the sun, then take a second shot, but drop your finger down in front of the lens to cover the sun. Then, in Photoshop, bring the two images in as layers with the finger image as the top layer. Then simply mask out the area with your finger in and boom, job done. Thanks to Jeff Cloak from Timaru for introducing me to this technique. So the takeaway from this experience is good photo opportunities can present themselves at unexpected times. So have your camera with you, know your settings, and practice so that you can work quickly and effectively. Thanks for watching. See you next time.